Hello everyone, welcome to the Ultra Dynamics channel. My name is Wael Hamze and today I'm going to show you how to get started with using the Power DevOps Tools. You will find this useful if you are just starting with automating builds and releases for your Power Platform projects. If you already have pipelines, you might still want to watch this as you may find about a few things that will make your pipelines more optimal. Here is the agenda for today. I will start with a brief summary of why you should consider DevOps tools on your Power Platform projects. Next, I will give you an intro into the Power DevOps tools. Then I will move into the prerequisites that you will need to start using the tools. Before the demo, I will briefly explain the scenario and pattern that I will be using for the pipeline automation. In the demo, we will take a look at the environment setup and how to install the Azure DevOps extension. Next, we will create a pipeline to produce a solution zip. For this, I will show you how to use service principals in the form of Azure Active Directory app registrations to connect into the CDS environment. Finally, we will take a look at how to create a release to automate the import of the solution zip. For the release, I will also use Azure DevOps libraries to consider the environment parameters. So why should you use DevOps and ALM tools on your Power Platform projects? Here are 5 reasons. Number 1 is automation. If you are still doing manual builds and releases, DevOps tools can help you automate these manual and repetitive tasks. Number 2 is quality. Manual tasks are prone to errors. Steps can be missed or incorrectly executed. This can lead to defects and inconsistencies across environments. DevOps tools will help you to minimize these issues. Number 3 is productivity. By eliminating manual steps and reducing defects, your team becomes more efficient. Number 4 is predictability. Once you have automation, releases become more consistent and predictable. You will be able to move requirements more quickly across your environments. This will give your team more confidence and the ability to release more frequently. And finally, number 5 is business value. All of the above will free up your team from doing manual repetitive tasks and fixing avoidable issues to allow them to focus on delivering value to the end customer. So what are the Power DevOps tools? Power DevOps Tools is an Azure DevOps extension. It provides a set of tasks that allow you to automate some of the most common steps that you would normally do to package and release your Power Platform and Dynamics solutions. The tools were initially released in the beginning of 2017, with regular releases bringing new features since then. The tools support the latest online version of CDS and Dynamics 365. However, most of the tasks will also run successfully on premises version 8.2 and above. Some of the tasks will also work with previous versions. The tools are open source on GitHub. What this means is that you can view the full source and contribute to it if you want. Currently, the tools provide 48 different tasks. Most tasks are for managing solutions, so you can do things like export, import, versioning, and copying components. There are also many tasks to manage environments, so you can do things like create, backup, reset, restore. I will show you some of these tasks in action shortly. Before you get started using the Power DevOps tools, here are a few prerequisites you will need. First, you will need an Azure DevOps account. If you don't have one already, you can sign up for a free account using this link. Next, you will need 2 to 3 Dynamics 365 or CDS environments. This is required to promote solutions across environments, as you will see shortly. If you don't have an environment or you don't want to try in your existing environments, you can sign up for a free trial using this link. Before we jump into demo, let's take a look at the scenario we will be automating. This is probably the most commonly used pattern, especially on projects that don't have DevOps automation yet. It is also the easiest to implement, so it is a good candidate to use when getting started with DevOps and automation. In this scenario, we have one development environment and we have one solution that we want to promote from dev into test and then prod. In reality, you may have more environments, but the same principles will apply, and this should be good enough for this demo. Let's assume we start with version 1.0.0.0 in dev. Team makes some changes to the solution. Once we are ready to promote it into test, we increase the build version, export the solution, and then import into test. This solution will go through a number of iterations before it is ready for production. Once the team is happy with it, let's assume this is version 1.0.0.2, we import the solution into production. Now the team can start to work on the next release. So we will increase the major or minor version of the solution. In this scenario, the team will increase the version to 2.0. Same cycle will now continue to promote the changes from dev into prod. Note in this scenario, because the team is working in one environment and one solution, good coordination is required to agree the time when everyone is ready to promote the completed changes from dev into test. Now let's take a look at how an automated DevOps pipeline can support us with implementing the solution export flow. The goal is to automate all the steps in the solution export flow. In our case, to automate the promotion of the CDS solution containing the changes from dev into prod. We start with the team making some changes to the solution in the development environment. Once the changes are completed, the team will trigger an automated build. In this case, the build automation is done using Azure DevOps. The build will perform all the steps that you would normally do manually from the UI. So it will update the version of the solution and then export the solution as managed. Next, it will store the solution zip in an artifact repository. The solution zip is now available to be deployed to downstream environments. If the build is successful, it can optionally trigger a release. The release will consume the solution zip produced by the build, and we will import the solution into the test environment. At this point, some form of manual or automated testing will be conducted. Once sign-off is obtained, the operations team can approve the deployment into the production environment. Now the release automation tool will promote the solution into production using exactly the same steps that were performed in the test environment. This is how you can achieve consistency and predictability. Next, we will take a look at how to configure this process using Azure DevOps. Let's take a look at the setup I will use for automating the solution export flow. So the first thing I've done is I've gone into trials.dynamics.com and I've created a new Dynamics 365 trial. So once you go through this process, then you can go into the Power Platform Admin Center. So in here, I've created 3 new environments, dev, test, and UAT. So to do this, I've clicked on new and then selected the type of the environment to be trial, and then made sure that the create a database is set to yes, and then gone ahead and created these environments. So you'll notice that these environments were created by different users, and the main reason for that is that you can only create one environment per user. So I had to create some additional users in the Office 365 portal to be able to do this. So let's take a look at the Maker portal. So I'm currently connected to the dev environment. So this is the environment I will be using to export the solution from. So I have a solution called DevOps Demo. And at the moment, this solution has only one custom entity. So this should be enough to demonstrate the DevOps process. It's a good idea to start with small solutions when you're starting to implement your DevOps process, because that allows the pipeline to run a little bit quicker than if you had a solution that, for example, took 30 minutes to import. And that allows you to make quickly fixes to the pipeline because you're unlikely to probably get it working from the first time. So it can just save you a little bit of time. So let's take a look at how we can automate the solution export flow using Azure DevOps. So I have a new Azure DevOps account that I've created for this demo. If you don't have an Azure DevOps account, you can go into the Azure DevOps homepage and you can start for free. If you haven't used Azure DevOps before, Azure DevOps is a platform that provides end-to-end DevOps capabilities. So it allows you to manage your requirements. You can store your source control in there as well. And finally, you can also build CI and CD pipelines, usually the Azure Pipelines capability. So this is what I will be using today to automate the build and deployments of the solution export flow. So to create the first pipeline, we need to go into the pipelines area in Azure DevOps. So let's create a new pipeline. So Azure DevOps allows you to create two types of pipelines. One of them is the pipeline as code, which is YAML, and the other one is the classic pipeline, which you create through the UI. So this is the one we will be using today. The next thing is you have to decide, which source control repo you want to build. In this case, we don't have any source control, but we still have to select a repo. So I'll select the default repo in the account. Next, you have to select the template. So there are different templates for different technologies. There isn't one yet, I believe, for Power Platform. So I'm just going to go with an empty job. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give this another name. So let's call it DevOps Demo, which is the name of the solution I'm going to be trying to export. So agent job is where you will list all the steps that you would normally do manually, but you want to automate. So this is where the job will run. So when you go to the pipeline, you can see some options with regards to where your build is going to run. So you have a number of options here. So the default is the Azure pipeline. So if you create a new Azure DevOps account, you get some out-of-the-box agents that you can use to run the job. But you can also run it on your own infrastructure if you want. So to get started, let's try and add some steps in here. So you get some out-of-the-box steps that ship with Azure DevOps, but if you want to do anything with the Power Platform, then you will need to download an extension from the marketplace. So if I search for Power Apps, you can see there isn't anything out of the box, but there is a number of extensions that come up from the marketplace. So today I'm going to be showing you how to use the Power DevOps Tools. So to get this installed, you just click on Get for Free. So that takes you into the Azure DevOps Marketplace. So let me just quickly show you what information is available in here. So for this extension, you can see, for example, the list of tasks. So they are grouped by category. So you can see there's a number of extensions that look at managing data, such as configuration data. There is some tasks for managing your environments, some other ones for importing and exporting solutions, and a number of other different utilities. If you want to look at the source code, there is a link here which takes you into GitHub. So once you're into GitHub, you can take a look at the source code and you can raise any questions or issues you have about the extension itself as well. Finally, the extension gets updated regularly. So if you want to see the latest information, you can go into the version history. So it shows you all the releases for that extension and what features were released as part of each release. So let's try and install the extension. So you just click on Get for Free, which takes you to the installation page. And then once the extension is installed, it will get loaded into your Azure DevOps account. So if you have more than one account, then we'll ask you which account you want to install it into. But in this case, let's just install it into this account. So once you're done, you can close this page. And then we go back into the page. So normally the extensions are cached. So if I try and do this again. And I search for example, Power Apps. It's still not gonna show me anything. So what I normally do is once you install the extension, you save your pipeline and then refresh your page. So if you go back now, so if you type plus, let's try, for example, solution import. So you can see lots of tasks now relating to solutions will start to show up. So before we take a look at exporting the solution, what I would normally like to start with is a ping test. So the ping basically is just attempting to connect to the target environment. So in this scenario, I will be communicating from the Azure DevOps agents in Azure to Dynamics Online. So that should be fairly straightforward. But if you have your own infrastructure, this can be a little bit more complicated. So it's a good idea to just test to see whether you are able to connect to the environment before you start to do anything else. Once you establish the connectivity, then we can start to build on top of that. So if we look at the ping environment, and in general this applies to all the other tasks, there is little icons with information on each task, so you can see what the task is doing. The other thing is for each of the parameters, there is another icon as well. So in this case, the ping environment task takes as an input as a connection string. So you can see more information about what you should be supplying to this parameter. For example, in this case, you have to click another link. So this task uses the standard XRM tooling. So you have to specify the connection string in that format. So you can see there is different options on this page on, what parameters is acceptable and the different types of authentication. So let's go back into the ping task. So probably the first thing that you'll have to decide is what account you will use to connect to the CRM environments. So ideally you don't want to be using your own account, because if you change your password, for example, the pipeline will stop working. If your AD account gets disabled, the pipeline will stop working. And finally, generally these days, using a username and password, some of the accounts will have MFA enabled, which is multi-factor authentication. So for example, in the case of this trial that I have, every time I try and log in to the CRM environment, it's sending me a message on my phone with the verification code. So I did try and actually to connect using my account with the username and password into the Dynamics environment. But even though the credentials were correct, it wasn't working. So for this reason, I'm going to show you actually a different way to connect to the CRM environment, which is likely the way you'll probably end up using, in the future as well. So it's called authenticating using the app registration. So this is normally used for system-to-system authentication. And in this case, actually, Azure DevOps is just another system. So let's try and set up this ping task to work with an app registration. So to create an app registration, you need to go into the Azure portal. Once you're in the Azure portal, you go to the Azure Active Directory and then click on app registrations. So once you're there, you can click on new registration. So we need to give it a friendly name. So in this case, we call it DevOps Dev account. So after that, there's a number of optional parameters which we don't have to supply in this case. So once the app is created, you want to take a note of the ID, because that's the ID or the equivalent of the username that we will use for authentication. So the next thing is to create a secret. So that's the equivalent of the password. So we create a new secret. You can have more than one secret. So I'm just going to call this one DevOps. You'll also need to take a note of the value in there, because we're going to use that to authenticate. So once you do that, the final step is to give the app registration some permissions. So we come to the permissions page, and you can search by different permissions. So in this case, I'm gonna select the common data service. So you need to use the user impersonation and then click add permissions. So that kind of converts into Dynamics CRM permission. So once we create the app registration, we need to create a user for that in CDS. So I'm going to go into my dev environment and then go into the advanced settings. So I want to go to the security and then select users. So by default, it will show us all the users in the environment, but what we want actually to look at is the application users. So let's look at application users. So let's create a new application user. So what you will need here is to give the user a name and the application ID. So the application ID is the application ID that we just created. You need to give the user a friendly name. So let's just give it the same name actually. It's probably actually better to give it the name same as the primary email, because even though this user doesn't have an email, we still have to give it an email. So let's call it DevOps Dev. So once you do that, you'll click on Save. So if the application ID is valid and has the right permissions, then you can see that this application user is now linked to the Azure Active Directory. So the next step is to give the user some permissions. So in this case, you want to provide system administrator, because that's the role that is required to export and import solutions. So now that I have the application registration created, I can try to use that in the ping task to connect to the dev environment. So because we're using the application registration, the authentication mechanisms that we will want to use for the connection string would be client secret. So this is the format. So it basically takes the URL, the app ID, and then the secret. So all I have to do is go back into the ping task and then put a connection string. So you can see this is the ID of the app that we created. And this is the URL of the dev environment. So the only thing that is missing is the secret. And I don't want to be putting the secret in the connection string in here, because it's a secret or sensitive information. So if you do that, everyone else can see the secret, and when you run the build, you can see that in the logs as well. So what I normally tend to do is you can create a pipeline variable called secret, and once you do that, you want to make sure you put that lock on so that the information is protected. So I'm just gonna put the secret that I've obtained from the Azure portal in here. So you can see now we have the secret, we have the connection string as well. So the last step that we need to do before we save and try and execute this pipeline is, at the moment, if I run this pipeline, it's going to fail. And the reason is because every task in the Power DevOps Tools requires a tool installer task. So there is a Power DevOps Tool installer. So this task actually contains all the dependencies that are required by the other tasks. So things like NuGet gallery libraries and PowerShell gallery libraries. So you need to put it as the first step in your build or release pipeline, and then put the other tasks. So in this case, I'm going to use the default options for for this task. So let's try and run this pipeline and see if we can connect to the dev environment. So let's run the pipeline. So when the pipeline starts, it's going to be in the queued state, which means it's waiting for an agent in Azure DevOps to be available. Once an agent is available, the pipeline should start to execute. If you want to see more details about the execution, you can click on the agent job, and then you can see the pipeline executing. So you can see tools were configured, and then the ping task actually executed successfully. If you want to see more information about each task, you can click, and then in this case, the ping task gives you the user ID of the user in CDS. So the first step is successful. So now we can start to look at adding more steps into this pipeline. So let's add some more tasks to this build definition. So the first task I'm going to add is the publish customizations task. So this task will allow you to publish all the changes in the dev environment before you export the solution, to ensure that all the changes get included as part of the export. The only time you may not want to do this is if you have many developers working in the environment, and some of them have created some changes but they haven't published because they don't want to promote them. So you're gonna have to make a decision on this, whether you want to include this task in your build definition. So this task takes a connection string as well. So similar to the ping task, but instead of having to copy the same information, I'm going to make this a little bit more efficient. So I'm gonna create a pipeline variable with the connection string, and I can use that. So let's do this again. So I'm going to use this variable now here, and I'm gonna do the same thing with the ping task. So the next task I'm going to use is the set version. So we want to make sure that we increment the version of the solution before we export it. So again, this task takes the connection string. So I'm going to use the same connection string to the dev environment. The next parameter is the solution name. So in our case is the DevOps demo solution. So I'm going to create another parameter for the solution name. So let's use that as well. So it's a good idea to put common parameters for the value that you will repeat in the build definition. So this makes the build definition a bit more reusable in case you want to change the value, or in case you want to reuse this build by exporting it for other solutions as well. So the last parameter that this task requires is the version number. So the version number we want to generate dynamically. So at the moment, if you've noticed, the build version is using just an integer, which is like the default option. So it's giving you like an incremental value like 1, 2, 3. So we want to make sure that the version number of the build aligns to the CRM solution version that we want. So I'm going to use the same format that is our current solution, but I'm going to increment the last digit every time someone uses the build. So to be able to use this value, we'll need to set some dynamic system parameter. So if you go into the predefined values link in the docs, you'll see that there is lots of system parameters that you can use to provide dynamic values. So for example, the build number is one of these dynamic values that you can use. So every time there is a new build, it will give you the number for that specific build. So I encourage you to have a look at this page, because there's lots of different values that you will find useful when you're creating your build definitions. So let's go ahead and just set this value to use the dynamic build number. So basically what this is going to do is going to use the build number that we specified in the format here. So let's add the solution export task now. So let's do the solution export. So again, you can see that the connection string needs to be added again, and the solution name. So I'm just going to copy these as well. So next, it's going to ask you whether you want to export as managed or unmanaged or both. So in this case, I'm just going to export managed solution. But you can export two solutions in case you want to push these changes to another dev environment, or you want to push it, into like a test environment. So in most cases, you probably end up exporting both. But for this demo, I'm just going to export the manage. One of the questions that you have is whether you want to include the version in the name. So by default, the solution version that gets generated, it doesn't have a version number in the file name, but if you want to include that, you can tick this box. There is a number of additional parameters as well you can use. So for example, if you want to export the general settings, you can tick that box. So you can use the task help to get some more information about this. So this task uses the solution export request. So if you click on that, so these are all the parameters that normally get passed into the solution export request. So if you want to find out, for example, what is actually in the export general settings, so you can see all these different organization settings are included in that. So if you've made a change to one of these settings in your dev environment and you want that setting to be included in the solution export, so you don't have to apply it again when you import the solution, you can, tick one of these boxes. Just be aware that all these settings will get imported from the dev. So you just need to make sure that you've got the right values in the dev environment, unless you override them later. So one of the other parameters is the output path. So this is where do you want to place the solution zip file once it is exported. So this will be a location on the agent machine where the build is running. So before we set that, there's another task that I want to use, which is the publish build artifact. So this will allow us to publish any artifacts from this build into the build artifact, so we can use it for releases. So there is a task called publish build artifacts. So I'm going to click on that. So if you see, this task takes a number of parameters. So one of them is like the artifact name. So in this case, I'm going to set it to the solution name. And the next option is, which path do you want to publish? So any files in this location will get published as an artifact. And ideally, you only want to publish the artifacts that you will use in your releases. So this task takes the files from this location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this value and I'm going to export solution to this location. So now you should have all the steps that you need to be able to update the version of the solution and then export it. So let's save and queue this build and see what happens. So you can notice the first thing is that the version number is now changed. So it's 1.001. So what we would expect after this build runs is that the version of the solution inside the dev environment will also change to this version. So we can see the build is now running. So it's downloading the tools, and then it's going to publish the customizations. You can see what's happening by looking at the logs as well. So publishing customizations normally takes a little bit of time. In this case, it's just one entity, so I'm hoping that it's not going to take too long. But it's a new environment as well, so it may take a little bit longer than if we had published customizations before. So that's, as you can see as well, previously we were version 14, so now we've got the right format in there. So let's take a look again. So published customizations completed, the set versions completed, and all the export and the publish are completed as well. So everything worked as expected. So one of the things that you will notice is that there is one artifact that has been published as part of this build. So if we click on the published artifacts, we can see the solution name, which is the artifact name in this case that we provided. And we can see that the managed version of the solution is exported. So if we take a look now at the version number of the solution in the development environment, so that's now 1.001. So if we queue the build again, it will change to 1.0.0.2 and then so on. If you want to change the major or minor or the patch version, then you will have to go into the build definition and manually edit the version number. So let's take a look at how we can import the DevOps demo solution into the test and UAT environments. So for this, I will use the releases feature in Azure DevOps. Releases allow you to create pipelines that deploy components into multiple environments. So let's go ahead and create a new pipeline. So there aren't any templates for Power Platform at the moment, so I'm going to go ahead with an empty job. The first thing you have to do is you have to provide a stage name. So stages in releases are environments. So in this case, I'm going to need the test environment. So let's do that. So the first thing is you will need to add an artifact. So artifacts are the components that you want to deploy on the target environment. So in our case is the solution zip. So the solution zip is produced by the DevOps demo build that we just created. So let's link this build to the pipeline. And let's give this pipeline a name. So let's call it DevOps demo. And let's save the pipeline. It's a good idea to save the release if you're making too many changes in case there is an issue with the browser and you lose your changes. So let's add some steps into the test environment. So on every environment, you can add a list of steps or tasks. So these are the tasks that will be executed on that environment. So let's add the tool installer task. So this is the first task that we have to add before we add any of the other tasks. And let's add the solution import task as well. So the solution import task allows you to import the solution into a target environment. So the first thing that you will have to provide the solution task is the connection string. So previously in the build, we used the variables to provide the connection string. In the release, I'm going to show you a different approach that you can use as well to provide and configure these values, which is called libraries. So let's take a look at the libraries feature in pipelines. So I have created some libraries already for this release pipeline. So I'm going to walk you through these. So a library is just a collection of different parameters. So once you create a library, you can link that to a build or a release. In a release scenario, you can link it to either the release or a specific environment in the release. So it's a good idea to structure libraries so that they are maintainable, but at the same time give you flexibility. So in this scenario, I have the connection string format. So I know I'm gonna use this across multiple environments. So in this case, I'm using client secrets. So I will need the client ID, the client secret, and the CDS URL. So that connection format will be shared across all the environments. So I put it in a common library. Similarly, the CDS region is the same for all my environments. So I only need to store it once. And the CDS URL format, which contains the instance name and the region, is stored in here as well. So the only thing I need to provide to complement this information is the ID, the secret, and the CDS instance name. So for this reason, I created different libraries for different environments that just contain this information. So in case of the test environments, I have the instance name and I have the credentials that are required to connect to that environment. And you may sometimes share some credentials across environments, especially like development environments, but you'll probably want different credentials for more sensitive environments such as UAT or production. So once you create your library, you can basically consume them in the release, as you will see shortly. So let's go into the variables and variable groups. So this is where you're able to link the release into libraries. So in this case, I'm going to link the common library to all the release because I'm going to use these values across all the environments. And then I'm going to link the test environment into my test environments because these values are only relevant to the test environment. So once I do that, you can see the different values in here. So in this case, I'm going to be using the CDS connection. So if we go back into the import solution, I can now specify the CDS connection here. So the next parameter is the solution file. So this is going to come from the build. So if you're using Azure DevOps builds, then you can easily see the contents of all the artifacts in here. So in this case, I'm going to select the managed solution. There's a number of other parameters you can specify to the import solution task. So publish workflows is one of the ones you'll probably end up using. So when you import a solution, solutions tend to contain processes. So if you want to get these activated after the solution is imported, you have to select this tick box. The other one that you may want to use is the holding solution. So if you are doing a stage for upgrade, this parameter will allow you to stage that solution for upgrade. And there is another task which then you can use to apply the upgrade, but I'm not going to be showing this in this specific demo. The other parameter that is useful as well is the override solution. So by default, if you import a solution, if it's the same version, then this task will skip the import of the solution. But if there is a scenario where you want to actually override the solution, even though it's the same version, then you can tick this box. And finally, if you untick this box, you can import the solution in synchronous mode. I've seen scenarios in the past where this was useful, especially in older versions of Dynamics where the import in async mode wasn't working. But in general, you probably should just use the async mode because it's more reliable and is not subject to timeouts on proxies and things like that. So there is a number of additional parameters which I'm not going to go into too much detail today, but these parameters allow you to control the timeouts when you're importing the solution, and the locations of where you want to place the log files from the imports. So this is all you really need to do to be able to import the solution into the test environment. So let's save this release definition and give it a try. So to test this release, you can create a new release. So let's do that. Normally you would have the option to select the version that you want to release. In this case, we only have one build at the moment. So let's just go ahead with this one. So once you create the release, basically you're able to monitor on what's going on with the release. So at the moment, the release will wait in the queue. Once an agent is available, then the release will start executing. You can also see in the artifacts is the version that this release is actually deploying, and you can click from here into the build if you need to see more information about the status of the build. So let's go back into the release. So at the moment, this release is executing. So you can see the first step is always to get the tools downloaded. So once this is done, it will start importing the solution. So there is some useful information in here. So you can see the size of the solution. You can see the version of the solution that you're importing as well. And it's telling you that this solution is not currently installed. If the solution was installed, then you'll be able to see some more information about the version of the solution that is currently installed. So it's a small solution in this case, so it shouldn't take too long, and so we should be able to quickly see whether our release process is working. Sometimes the logs will stop refreshing, so you can always hit the refresh button as well. So once this release is completed, if you'll be able to download any logs as well that are associated with the release. So if you're importing the solution manually through the UI, at the end of the import, you'll get an Excel file which lists all the steps or the components that were processed and which ones were processed successfully, which ones were processed with warning, and which ones failed. So you should be able to get this information as well from here. So the release has completed now. So you can see the progress of the release. You can see the success. And in this case, all the components were processed. And there is an XML file that was generated with the logs. So if you want to see the contents of the XML file, you can download the logs. So once you download the logs, you can find the XML file, and you can open the XML file in Excel, and you'll be able to see more information about what happened during the import. So this is the same file that you get from the UI basically. So in case you have any issues with the import, or you just want to double check things, you can always download the logs and take a look at the error message, which will help you diagnose the problem and fix it. So let's take a look in the test environment and see if the solution was deployed. So if you go into solutions, you see that the DevOps demo solution was successfully deployed, and it's the same version as the one that was produced by the build. So the next step is to import the solution into the UAT environment. So for this, we would need to edit the pipeline and add another environment. So one of the easy ways to do this is to just clone the environment. So once you clone the environment, all you have to do is just give it a new name. If we click at the tasks, so all the tasks are already been copied from the previous environment, and because we're using variables, you don't have to make any changes now. There is another way which you can share or group list of tasks and then share them, is using task groups, but I won't go into this feature in this demo. So one of the things that you still have to do is you have to worry about the variable groups. So at the moment, you see once we clone the test environment, you see that the task group is also cloned as well. So we'll have to make some changes in here. So let's just not link the UAT environment into the test group. So we'll need to basically link the UAT environment into the UAT group. So once you do that, then we have the UAT environment linked to UAT and the test environment linked to the test group. So this pipeline should be ready. One of the other things that I wanted to show you is the approvals piece. So you can add approvals basically before an environment gets the solution deployed into. So in this case, you can select the user that requires to approve the deployment to a specific environment. So this can be useful if you have testers or UAT owners that need to approve before a deployment goes into a specific environment. And one of the last things I wanted to make to this pipeline is at the moment we're having to create a release manually. But what I really want to do now is every time somebody generates a new build, then I want this release to trigger automatically. So every time someone now will queue the DevOps demo build, this pipeline should trigger automatically. So let's just save the pipeline now. So instead of creating a new release, let's go into the pipelines area and then go to the DevOps demo pipeline and just run this pipeline again. So we should see the version of the pipeline basically changing to version 2. So once this build completes now, then a new release should be created automatically, and then the deployment into test should happen, and then we should get an approval notification for UAT. So the build has completed now. So you can see another artifact was published with version 2. So we can take a look at the releases from the builds as well. So you can see a new release was triggered automatically as a result of this build. The deployment to test has already completed. So let's take a closer look. If we look at the logs, go into the import solution specifically, we can see the version that was installed is 1, and now we installed version 2. So that completed successfully as well. So if we go back into the pipeline, you can see the pipeline didn't deploy into UAT automatically, so it's pending approval. So once I approve this deployment, then this release will get deployed into UAT now. So if we look at the test environment as well, we have version 2 now in the test environment, and we're just in the process of deploying version 2 into the UAT environment as well. So at the end of this release, we should have the same version deployed using the same mechanism into all our environments, which gives us consistency. Today I have shown you how easy it is to get started in implementing DevOps pipelines for your Power Platform projects using the Power DevOps Tools. If you have any feedback or issues with the Power DevOps Tools, you can raise these on GitHub. If you have a great idea and would like to contribute to the project, best thing to do is again to raise an issue on GitHub to propose your idea and agree the requirement before submitting the pull request. Hope you found this video useful. Subscribe to this channel if you want to be notified of future videos relating to the Power Platform, Azure and DevOps. Let me know in the comments if you have anything specific that you would like a video on. And finally, thank you for watching.